from when I started practicing to now, I feel like I'm on a continuing learning journey. So it's not as if once I started teaching, I didn't need to learn anymore. I think it's that attitude of, in a way, I'm a beginner. I'm refreshing what I know. I'm looking back at it. I'm seeing it from a different perspective because now it's been, say I took a course 5 years ago. 5 years later, I have things have happened in my life. I have different cases. I have experienced different challenges. I could take this something very similar and like, oh, I didn't really pay attention to that piece last time because it wasn't up for me, or there wasn't a case that was really challenging that it really spoke to. And this time, there's something else that's going on that I have questions about that I'm reflecting on.
The Center for Understanding and Conflict welcomes you to The Other Chair, a monthly podcast exploring the dynamics of conflict and how to bring the human issues to the table. Together with our guests, we explore how the power of understanding each other can lead to better solutions for people on both sides of an issue. We will also share tips for managing your own mediation practice, approaching conflict in the professional world, and ways to apply our understanding-based model in your personal life. Hello to our listeners and welcome to The Other Chair. My name is James Dyke. Today's guest is Catherine Connor, Director and Trainer at the Center for Understanding and Conflict and an attorney practicing mediation and collaborative practice in Santa Rosa, California. This episode of The Other Chair explores the value of ongoing professional development and the importance of refreshing core fundamentals for understanding-based mediators and conflict resolution practitioners, including peer support, continuous self-reflection work, and evaluating prior cases and model application. Hello, Catherine, and welcome back to The Other Chair.
James, thanks for inviting me to talk today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you some more today. I know the last time that you were here, we were touching on some similar themes, but as we're about halfway through the year, and we've concluded a lot of programming this end, and our teacher training program is midway through for the year. Some questions have come up about staying fresh in your practice and being able to kind of check yourself and check in with others to ensure that you're still doing your best work and continuing to learn as much as you can in the process. And so maybe to start, for anyone who's listening who hasn't before, we could do the quick elevator summary of your career experience, and we'll jump into some questions.
So I've been a practicing lawyer for now over 41 years. And I took my first mediation training in 1984. So that was 40 years ago. And at that time, I was practicing and have continued to practice just in the family law field. And for about 20 years, my first 20 years, I was doing a mix of processes. So I was uh, helping people to settle. That's always been a focus for me, but also litigating, going to court if necessary. If absolutely necessary, it was never something I really was aggressively doing, but I did trials and other work. And then about 20 years in, I decided that I would rather be working with people who are focused on trying to reach an agreement. So I phased out the litigation part of my practice. And also at that time, collaborative practice was starting up, which is a team approach of lawyers, financial professionals, mental health professionals working as a team to help people resolve their conflict out of court. I also, at that point, focused a lot on building up my mediation practice, and then continued to represent and help people as essentially a settlement counsel. So if the case didn't settle, I would transfer to someone to litigate it. And so that's what I've been doing the last 20 years in my private practice. And then also I've been a teacher with the center for about 20 years, teaching mediation, collaborative practice, conflict resolution.
So how do you stay current? I know, I guess for you personally, you have a little bit more of an advantage because you're steeped in this work from an educational perspective at the center in different capacities for many years. But let's go to earlier in your career. How did you continue to evolve your practice through the fundamentals and really stay on top of what you had learned to ensure that you were continuing to follow the model and apply it in a fresh way?
For me, I am what people kind of colloquially call a lifelong learner. So I never feel like I know it and I've reached my, peak and I don't need to learn more. So from when I started practicing to now, I feel like I'm on a continuing learning journey. So it's not as if once I started teaching, I didn't need to learn anymore. So, and that learning has happened in many different ways. So one way is just formal training and classes, which I have done through all of my 41 years of being in practice. I took the 40-hour training, as I said, in 1984. I did it again in 2003, right before I was going to start teaching. And then, of course, I've taught it for all these years, but you learn when you teach. So that's always been something that it's like a through line for me, is staying in touch with those fundamentals. And then also taking advanced classes on particular topics. And then I also was a part of the original Skippy program, which is our self-reflection for conflict professionals intensive. So I started that in 2007, I believe it was 2007 when that program started. So I was in one of the original cohort and continued to take Skippy classes ever since. So for me, I think it's that attitude of, in a way, I'm a beginner. I'm refreshing what I know. I'm looking back at it. I'm seeing it from a different perspective because now it's been, say I took a course 5 years ago. 5 years later, I have things have happened in my life. I have different cases. I have experienced different challenges. I could take this something very similar and like, oh, I didn't really pay attention to that piece last time because it wasn't up for me, or there wasn't a case that was really challenging that it really spoke to. And this time there's something else that's going on that I have questions about that I'm reflecting on. And so even the same content will hit me differently. One that I think was particularly funny to me now, given how much we focus on it, is looping. So took that initial course in 84 and then took a series of courses, advanced topics with the center. And I think after about maybe 2 other courses, I'm like, oh, now I get this looping. Maybe I should be doing this a lot more. It's like somehow it took trying it different ways, going back and relearning it, going back and trying it again, relearning it, practicing it before it really sunk in as this is so critical. And now it's just part of my everyday life. I mean, you can ask my family. I loop all the time, or my friends. So it just feels quite natural to me. But that was because I kept revisiting it and looking at it from different ways and practicing it in different ways.
Conflict manifests itself in many ways in our personal lives, for professionals in the workplace and for practitioners who have made a career bringing together parties in conflict through mediation practice. Each month, the Center for Understanding in Conflict hosts live webinars with featured guests discussing best practices and sharing their experiences for tackling conflict using the understanding-based model. So I'd say for the average person, and everyone's unique, but for the average person that takes a 40-hour training, either here at the center or in a different model or through another trainer, they take it one time and then they jump into their field or they transition their career. And realistically, a 40-hour training is the equivalent of taking a class in college for one semester in terms of the teaching hours, and then not really coming back to updates in the field, fresh perspectives on the application of the learning material, new things that have been learned and shared, or even the ability to connect with and collaborate with others who are, learning and applying the work in different ways. And in your experience, what sort of gaps start to manifest over time if you kind of don't reapproach, reevaluate based on the fundamentals that you learned in the beginning? How can that start to present itself over time or even drift away from the central training?
I think what's really important is that you keep revisiting, what am I doing? So if I finish a case and it's gone great and the people were, working well with each other, and it's like, okay, you might think, oh, well, that was a pretty easy case, but also, okay, what did I do in that case that helped that work? And that just happened recently with me. I had a very nice couple I work with, and they did most of the work. And at the end, they said to me, thank you so much. One of them said, I've had 2 other mediations before, and this was the best one ever. You did such a great job. You were so helpful. I was like, I didn't even feel like I was that helpful. I was there. I helped them communicate. At one point, they had a kind of a sticky question that I helped them really get clear on what was important to each of them. They actually had a really meaningful conversation about it. But I felt like it was 90% them, and I was just there at moments. But then I could reflect on that. Okay, what were those key things I did that were so important for them that made it work so well? And I think being able to identify those was because I've been doing all this training and teaching over the years, that I could um, look at that and say, okay, that is something that I want to make sure I replicate in the future. And I don't think I would have been able to identify that if I hadn't been continually sort of reflecting, learning, reflecting, learning. And the same thing with things go really, off track. I found when that happens, it's really helpful to have conversations with other practitioners to talk through it, because if it goes really off, it may very well be a blind spot for me or something that I'm not seeing. So I've been in a study group for almost 25 years. Well, I started as a collaborative practice study group in around 2000. And we did a combination of studying a particular topic or issue or theme, sometimes a book. We'd work our way through a book. And then we also coupled it with case studies. So we talked about, something that was coming up on our case. And so having that ability to have those conversations with other practitioners and really dive into, okay, this is what happened. Here's what I did. Here's what someone else did. Here was the response. What am I missing? What am I not seeing? Do you have any suggestions about where to go? That was so helpful to use my actual cases as the learning, and to use other people's cases as the opportunity for learning. In our courses, we create role plays. Often they're based on somebody's real case. So I just created one for our 40-hour training that was based on a real case of mine. But it's even better if we can have conversations about people's actual cases and help them work through it and see how aspects of our model, our tools, how they could help them find a different path or a different way to address that particular conundrum they're having. So I think the combination of actual, learning, going to a program, learning concepts, practicing the tools, having peer support and peer study, having someone you can run to as soon as the case is done. So one of my law partners who recently retired was also part of the initial Skippy cohort. So we've been training together for many years. We've gone to many conferences together. So if I had something that was really felt like a disaster, I could always go to her, like, what do you think's going on? I need to talk about this now. And so having someone that's there for you is also really helpful.
There a process that you is typically recommended in the trainings that you've conducted for those who are not connected to a peer group, or work within a professional community where they can get feedback to systematically review and evaluate their cases, even those they appeared to have a successful outcome, to check and see how it went and really refine and think through, what to do next time, maybe better or differently.
Yeah. So well, first of all, even if someone doesn't have a group, it might be that if you took a training with us, maybe there's someone you connected to, get in touch with them, say, could we be buddies? Could we just be there as someone that we could talk to each other about? Because I think that's really helpful. But let's assume for whatever reason, you're not able to do that and you're just going to be doing it by yourself. I think what's important is to reflect on what happened, and to do that by first getting in touch with your own responses and what your experience was, And what was the dynamic that happened between you and each other person that was in the room? Because sometimes it's happening with one of the parties. Sometimes if you have other people in the room, they might be lawyers, they might be experts, they might be allies, but someone else in the room, maybe you're having some kind of dynamic issue with. So to look at those carefully. And the question is, because you can't change what they're doing, right? Because you don't have control over somebody else. But what is it that I'm doing that might be impacting that? Do I have a judgment going on? Am I having some kind of behavioral reaction to them that they're seeing in my nonverbals? Is something going on? And if I recognize that, then look at, okay, so where does that come from within me? And how could I change my feeling toward the other person or my assumptions that I'm making about them? I can give an example of this. So I had a case involving a couple who had children, and one person was uh, very aggrieved about how much work they've been doing for their marriage, for the children, and that the other person really wasn't stepping up. And now they were trying to talk about a parenting schedule, and the expectation from the one party was the other person was not going to step up to being a parent, and described a lot of examples. And the other parent was like, it's not a problem. I just don't do it because the other person's doing it all. And, and wasn't taking really kind of responsibility of any kind for their part of what was going on. And this reminded me of someone who was a very close relative of mine. I'm not going to say who or how close, but a very close relative of mine who never took responsibility, always placing blame on someone else. And so it was really stirring me up. But it was hard for me to recognize in the moment. But I had a buddy at that point through the self-reflection program, and I met with her, I talked with her, we talked through it. We even did a little role play. What might it be like if I kind of let go of that story I created? Oh, this is that person. They're sitting right here with me. Again, they even kind of look like the person. And how could I be in a different place when I was in the mediations? And then that was so helpful. And what's interesting is the next mediation I went in and I really felt differently about the person. I had opened my heart. I let go of this story. I was ready to sort of engage and be much more curious about where they were. And literally 5 minutes in, the person said, I've been meeting with my therapist and I realized I'm kind of acting like a 7-year-old and I need to really step up. And that was so interesting to me because I had gone through this process of coming into a different relationship with them inside of me. And they had been coming to the process of being in a different relationship. And I don't know if they would have been willing to talk about that and say that if they had still felt this strong judgment coming from me. And it actually just was a real breakthrough in the mediation. And so I think if we can look at ourselves and say, okay, is there something that's going for me that's creating a block or is keeping me from being creative, keeping me from, being the kind of conflict resolution professional I want to be in this particular moment? What is it? Sometimes it helps to be writing about it. So to do a journal, I found that to be helpful, just like what's going on here, and just kind of let things flow, not trying to do it really analytical, but just kind of see what might flow out that I'm not accessing as well. And then finally, it's like going back to the basics. Have I missed some steps here? Are we not clear on what the process? Did we not do enough contracting? Is there something that's getting in the way of our process? Have we not had enough clarity about what the situation is, the facts? Have we not really looked as closely as we need to about what's important to them? What's the meanings? Are we missing some possible options? So just going through all the steps we train on And sometimes we just miss a step because we're caught up in it and maybe we're going with our gut, but we've actually kind of missed something. So always being able to just have readily accessible in mind or on paper the basics, the fundamentals of the process and the model is really helpful.
Throughout the year, the Center for Understanding in Conflict hosts in-depth basic and advanced certificate programs designed to train you to become effective mediators and conflict resolution professionals centered in the understanding-based model. Our training programs have been the gold standard in alternative dispute resolution for 40 years and is popular within the legal community with human resource professionals, ombudsmen, and corporate workplace mediation clients. On the topic of self-reflection and mindfulness, what steps do you take or do you recommend others to take over time to be able to approach each mediation in a fresh way, because the individuals and their conflict is very personal and applicable to them, even if you've encountered similar stories many times before? Or I guess in short, how do you keep the work of being a conflict resolution practitioner from just becoming a job where you show up, you check the boxes, you try to get them to a resolution, and maybe some of the humanity or understanding connection is lost in that?
Yeah. For me, taking our self-reflection program, being part of that program for so many years, um, really was, I think, one of the pivotal changes in my practice and the way I practiced. Because we spent so much time on trying to be able to recognize what's going on, what's our inner experience in the moment, in the room, and also afterwards, and actually even before. So, if I have had a very stressful week or stressful day, and I'm going to go into a meeting with clients, I'm going to try and make sure that I let go of what's already been happening. And that takes practice because I wasn't able to do that before without that practice of taking some breaths, or maybe go just doing a short meditative walk, or maybe it's getting up and moving my body, but something to let go of what's already happened and be fully present. And being fully present, at least for me, took a lot of practice because I might be thinking about what's about to happen or what just happened, and I want to just be there as present as possible, to be able to be responsive to what's happening in the room and not be doing it kind of from a rote performance or rote way of doing things.
Are there signs in the mediation room? Maybe people are pulling back, or mediators or conflict resolution practitioners are not performing to their best. Signs that show that maybe you're not showing up in that way or being aware in that way.
Well, certainly when emotions start getting really um, high, really fiery, something's going on in the room. Now, it might be that it's happening with them, and I'm actually there, and it could even be the sort of calm presence that helps them to stay in the room as opposed to just walking out. Um, but sometimes what's going on is there's a lot that's not being said, or it's being said not verbally, but it's showing up in the nonverbals. I think what's important is for each person to start to recognize what are the telltale signs to them that something is up, which they might not even be cognitively aware of. So for me, I start to feel it in my gut, or sometimes in a tightness in my chest. And I know when that happens, even though I haven't in my brain thought, oh, things are happening here, I should analyze this. My gut's telling me, okay, something's happening. Maybe it's not even so obvious. So it's not like people are yelling at each other. It's not even, maybe emotions aren't even showing in words, but something's happening on the dynamic energy, nonverbal basis. And so then I know, okay, something's going on. Sometimes I just say, something's happening here. I don't know what it is, but my gut can feel it. Let's have a conversation about it. And I think I'm much more willing now than I was years ago, to just put it out there. It could be because I've been doing this so long. It could be because I'm getting so old. It's like, I don't care what people think if I say I don't know what's going on, but there's something happening here and let's deal with it. Um, but I find that to be quite effective, because when something like that is happening in the room, I think everybody knows it. They just don't know how to deal with it. So bringing awareness to it and having a conversation about it is often very fruitful. Um, but to do that, you have to have experience of recognizing what's going on. You have to have the willingness to speak up, and then you have to have the tools to have that kind of conversation, because that kind of conversation can be very hard too, because that can really bring up stuff for people. So you have to have the ability to help guide that kind of conversation through looping, through paying attention and looping the dynamic, through helping the people to loop each other. There's a number of different tools that we teach and reteach and remind people of to help them in that kind of situation.
Are there any unique or subtle signs of burnout in mediators, especially those that have been at it a while and it's been some time since they've checked in with training or with others who are working in the field, that they may not realize are beginning to occur? And then what would you recommend doing about it once it's coming out?
Yeah. What we what I often see in people that come to training, people who have burned out on the profession as they've been doing it, and it's often um, they haven't yet become mediators, or they're working with conflict but in a way they didn't want to, so they're coming to our training to try and look at a different way of doing things. Um, I think across the professions of people that do work with people in conflict, the one of the main symptoms of burnout, or one of the main consequences of this work that shows up in burnout, is if you're willing to be open emotionally, which I think is really important to being able to do this work well, uh, then you're taking in people's emotions, their trauma. If you've opened your heart, it's going to somehow come into you in some way, and not being able to let it go. And so, wake up in the middle of the night, worrying, feeling anxious a lot, not wanting to be in a meeting, not wanting to go to work because you're just going to take in more pain and suffering from the people you're working with. And so that's been my personal experience, but also from a lot of people I've talked to. That's a challenge to be able to not just shut yourself down and stop being open-hearted, to stop, to be more guarded of yourself, which then impacts the work. So I think a really important skill to have is to be able to be open-hearted, be emotionally open, and learn to let go of those emotions and to breathe them out and to not hold on to them. And that took quite a long time for me to learn and to practice doing. But once I did, it really helped with the burnout that I've had at various times during my career.
This podcast is supported by our CUC Connect members, whose yearly membership includes free attendance to our live monthly webinars, 12 additional featured recordings of past training events, and support from our network of certified trainers for continued professional development. Consider joining CUC Connect today and dive deeper into the understanding-based model. Let's say I took a training program, 10 years ago to get a certificate so I could start doing this sort of work, and I'm comfortably within my practice. But it's been a while since I've re-engaged with, the material I first learned. What are some of the changes, either substantive changes to the core work that's being taught, or things that have been added or enhanced upon over the last decade or two, that one might not have gotten the first time around?
Yeah. One of the impacts of the Skippy, the self-reflection program, part of it was just trying to get clarity about how does that show up on our work. And it had been kind of an implicit part of the work that had been, or the model that had been developed by the center up until then. But since the Skippy program started, it's become much more an explicit part of our teaching. So we talk a lot more and do a lot more work at looking at what's going on inside with you. And it's become really an integral part of the model. That wasn't the case probably even 10 years ago, wasn't as clearly part of the model, although it was there implicitly, not as explicitly, and not teaching as much. We've also looked a lot more at identity and bias and how what happens at the societal level, the group level, the individual level, how that impacts the work we're doing, and both within our trainings and the work that people are doing when they're working with people in conflict. So that's become much more a part of what we're doing and looking at. We're also, I mean, the center started as focused on teaching people who are in the legal field. And then starting about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit more, but we started, and we changed our name to the Center for Understanding Conflict from the Center for Mediation in the Law, because we were seeing people from a lot more professions and backgrounds coming in. So we've also expanded who we're teaching to, how we adapt the material for different kinds of circumstances, with all of the through line being people are in conflict. People have conflicts. It's part of being a human. And how can we help people to go through conflict in a different way? So we've created more programming. We've adapted the program to hopefully have it be meaningful from whatever background someone's coming from and how they can apply it to their own work.
Last question I have for you, and I really like to ask you these questions when you come onto the podcast. What's one thing that someone can do now on their own? Because I can already hear you, recommend connecting with a peer group or looking. But what's something that someone could do today to kind of check themselves and evaluate, how they're doing, or be mindful of, where they should be putting some attention to stay fresh in the work that they're doing? Do you have a simple tip you can leave our listeners with?
I would suggest that they look at either some past cases or circumstances in which they've been helping people work through conflict, and maybe they pick 5 that have happened over time, maybe more recently, or that they say, okay, for the next 5, I'm just going to be paying attention, and then try and see if there are some themes that go through there. Are there places where things are getting stuck that seem to have a pattern? Are they having reactions to certain kinds of people that has a pattern? To look at those places where, try and find their blind spots, the places where they get most stuck, most reactive, most challenged, and then start to try and figure out, okay, these are the places I either need to learn more, I need to talk to someone else about, or I need to focus on myself and see what I could be doing differently.
Well, thank you so much, as always, Catherine, for being here today to share your experience and advice for staying sharp after 20 years as a practicing understanding-based mediator, even longer.
No, 40 years, 40 years.
Is it collaborative practice you've been doing for 20?
Yeah, collaborative for 20. Well, actually, 25 for collaborative practice.
Wow. Well, you're so experienced in the field. It's hard to keep track, but thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's always been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, James.
Catherine Connor is a senior director, program director, and teacher with the Center for Understanding in Conflict, where she has helped train thousands of program participants during her many years leading and growing the organization. You can learn more about Catherine and the center's work by visiting www.understandinginconflict.org. Thank you to today's guest for being with us today, and to our CUC Connect members whose support enables the Center for Understanding in Conflict to bring new perspectives in the field of conflict resolution and mediation to you, our listener, in each new episode. You can find out more about today's episode, along with full interviews and additional information about conflict resolution and mediation using the understanding-based model at www.understandinginconflict.org.